Good evening, everybody. As Rachel said, I am the president of Students for Life, and Students for Life is the social justice group on campus primarily focused on the abortion issue, which is why we're here discussing Roe v. Wade tonight. For years, we have tried to bring dialogue about the issue to campus. We've contacted group after group after group each year trying to get something to happen. So I really would like to extend a thank you to Secular Student Alliance for finally being willing to engage in such a contentious discussion, along with Michigan Political Union, because they're the ones facilitating this event, and for everybody here who is making this event really possible. And something that is a big event. I know there's like midterms going on, there's papers going on, so I really do appreciate you coming out tonight. I think that as this evening progresses, you'll see the vitality of the resolution on the table, that the U.S. Supreme Court should overturn Roe v. Wade. Social justice begins in legislation. It begins with the Emancipation Proclamation, with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, with the thundering collapse of Jim Crow laws. It begins with Brown versus Board of Education's tearing down of the status quo. It begins with the 19th Amendments providing for women's suffrage. So certainly there are individuals and there are groups that have prejudices even after legislation is in place. But if we don't have legislation in place, this prejudice will never die at all. And it's only with equal justice under the law that these can disappear altogether. So after all, if we think about a government, when a government stands up for the weakest and the most vulnerable and the most defenseless in society, and it refuses to tolerate an evil against them, that is when the victims of evil receive a protection that our founding fathers promised in the early documents, in the early planning meetings of our country. So tonight we will see the need for that protection for a different group of people that is often ignored, the unborn. I encourage you all to listen carefully to all the arguments presented this evening and ultimately seek the truth behind all the rhetoric. I trust that if you do, you will understand why Students for Life refuses to remain silent about the most important civil rights issue of our generation.
Hi everybody, it's so wonderful to see all of you. My name is Rodion and I represent the Secular Student Alliance. And I just want to tell you guys a little bit about it before we begin our awesome debate today. The Secular Student Alliance, we are a national organization and we are the Michigan chapter. And we are the official secular humanist group on campus. And we aim to promote the view of secularism and free thought and humanism on campus. As I just want to let some of you know what a secular humanist is. A secular humanist, when a secular humanist looks at another person, they don't see a gay person, a black person, an Asian person, a transgender person, a Muslim person, a Jewish person, or a Christian person. They see another human being, and they give that human being the respect that that human deserves. And that is exactly the point of view that we try to promote here at the SSA at U of M. And thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the debate. I just wanted to tell you when we meet in Angel Hall, room 2271, on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. We have free pizza, so come on down. If you like pepperoni, email us, and we'll get you some pepperoni pizza. So thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy the debate.
The resolution for tonight is the U.S. Supreme Court should overturn Roe v. Wade, and we will debate whether or not that resolution should be affirmed or denied. The format of tonight's debate is different than we usually do it, and very important, so I'm going to introduce that to you now. So we already had our opening remarks. How are we going to facilitate the debate? We have 4 speakers from Students for Life and 4 speakers from Student Secular Alliance. And they will alternate in their speeches, 4-minute speeches, after each other. During the speeches, I urge you not to clap, but after the speeches, I would welcome you to clap. After that, we have a 3-minute prep for rebuttals, where each side will, again, prep for rebuttals, and then each side will have a 5-minute rebuttal. After that, we have 25 minutes of audience participation, where we will entertain questions, and we'd like you to keep those questions under a minute. I will gavel you, not physically, but if if you go over 1 minute. And for comments, so we have questions that are 1 minute. For comments, they could be up to 1:30. And if we have time, which we won't near the end because that's how time works, I will give you a 30-minute extension if you need it. So yeah, with that, I wouldn't like to, some stresses for the nature of the debate. We do meet every other Monday, as Rachel said. So 2 Mondays from now, you're going to come back here at this place and this time. And as I said, we're going to start with coin toss. Coin toss. Cool. So in the spirit of Michigan football, who should I ask? Students for life. Okay. Students for life. What would you like to call it as?
We'll call it
Heads. It is landed heads. So students for life will begin, and some quick bios on our speakers tonight. From Students for Life, first speaker, Brian Koziara, studying Honors International Studies, French, and Music Composition, class of 2013. Next, Joe Lippa, class of 2014, studying Statistics. Third, Elise Eichmann, studying Political Science, class of 2012. Fourth, Anna Perron, Screen Arts and Cultures, class of 2013, on the side of Student Secular Alliance. Katie Dykman, undecided, 2015, good choice. Sahana Prasad, studying Biology and Women's Studies, class of 2015. Dakota Hatfield, studying Screen Arts and Cultures, class of 2013. And finally, Michael Jacobson, studying Public Policy, class of 2013. And with that, I invite our first speaker, Brian, to the podium.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming out this evening. I'd like to have us all examine once again the resolution that has been laid out on the table. The U.S. Supreme Court should overturn Roe versus Wade. Looking at this resolution, I'm going to argue in the affirmative, and I'm going to argue solely on the basis of jurisprudence. I'm not going to argue on the basis of whether there is a right to life. I'm not going to argue on what time life begins at, but I'm going to argue that Roe versus Wade is flawed jurisprudence and should be overturned as such. Setting aside the issue of a right to life, setting aside the issue of religion, of morality, the Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade acted as a super legislature in interpreting a law that was not, by interpreting the Constitution, interpreting various amendments that were never intended to be interpreted in such a manner and had no grounds to be interpreted in that manner. And also, by doing so, they infringed upon other basic rights enumerated in the Constitution and guaranteed by the primacy of rights. The Supreme Court should never act as a super legislature. It should not be able to create rights and creatively interpret the Constitution to derive new rights. Rights are granted either by God or by the unalienable Creator, as it's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence and also alluded to in the Constitution. If you are an atheist, I understand that. They are a system of a right is something that is given to every human being, every human organism that cannot be taken away or should not be taken away by any means, by any government, for any reason. Rights, however, are recognized by governments and protected by governments. And they also must be protected by governments in a way that guarantees everybody else's rights. There is a primacy of rights. There is an order of rights. It is reasonable to think that if my pursuit of happiness, as we have those three great rights in our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, if we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if my pursuit of happiness entailed killing other people, wouldn't that be infringing upon the rights? Do I have a right to pursue that happiness? No, I don't. There is a primacy of rights, an order in which those rights must be followed. And first and foremost is the right to life. Unless you are alive, you cannot experience liberty, you cannot enjoy liberty. And unless you are free, unless you have liberty, you cannot be free to pursue whatever makes you happy. But a right in and of itself is something that does not infringe upon someone else's rights. Therefore, a woman's right to privacy, as specified in the ruling Roe versus Wade by the United States Supreme Court, if it does then, in fact, infringe upon another human being's right to life, the unborn's right to life, then is that not violating the primacy of rights? Now, I'm sure many of you have heard that argument before. I wanted to go through a couple of the amendments to the U.S. Constitution, though, to make a point further. The Ninth Amendment states, and I quote, "The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." Therefore, if we have in the Fourth Amendment the right to privacy, also in the 14th Amendment that was used and quoted in the case Roe versus Wade, to grant a woman a right to an abortion, under the guise of a right to privacy. According to Article 9, that enumeration of that right in that amendment should not be construed to deny the right to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. And that's exactly what Roe v. Wade does. It denies another human being that right to life, based on the interpretation and the guaranteeing of another right, which is lesser in the rankings of primacy of rights. Similarly, I'd like to bring up in the 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Abortion should not be decided on a national level. It should be, it should not be decided on a national level by the Supreme Court. It could be decided by the United States Congress, because in Article 14th Amendment, Section 5, it says that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Therefore, it could interpret and decide how to enforce the provisions of Amendment 14 of the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Our first speaker this evening from the Student Secular Alliance, Katie Dyckman.
Abortion in Kenya is legal only when it is necessary to save a woman's life. This unreasonably strict law forces women to obtain back alley abortions, which causes 1/3 of maternal death in Kenya. In order for a legal abortion to be obtained, it must take place in a hospital with 3 medical practitioners certifying that the procedure is necessary to save the mother's life. In their desperation, many women resort to using metal wires and knitting needles in order to procure abortions, resulting in infection and death. A Kenyan social worker said, "Fetuses are dumped in the sprawling slum, and every week they find aborted fetuses in one garbage-filled street. The fetuses wash away or get eaten by pigs, and the mothers of these abandoned fetuses are often dead as well. This is the reality we are inviting if abortion is made illegal. The law will not cause abortion to end, but will instead create an epidemic of unsafe abortion practices that will result in the needless death of women who would still be alive if they were allotted their rights to safe health services. Do not fool yourself into believing that these abortion needs are exclusive to impoverished nations such as Kenya. Because, ladies and gentlemen, poverty has no nationality. In the United States, poverty rates are rising, and over the past decade, abortion has become increasingly common among poor women in America. In 2008, more than 4 in 10 abortion patients had incomes below the federal poverty line. All my statistics come from the Guttmacher Institute, which is the same institute the Students for Life will be using, and is an institute that provides resources on topics pertaining to sexual and reproductive health, and is recognized as an official collaborating center for the reproductive health by the World Health Organization. Who else in America is having abortions? Women in their 20s account for more than half of all abortions. 22% of all pregnancies, excluding miscarriages, end in abortion, and women of color are disproportionately likely to have an abortion. About 61% of abortions obtained by women are obtained by women who have one or more children, and many women who have abortions cite caring for their current children as the reason for choosing to have an abortion. And finally, 1 in every 2 American women will have an abortion by age 45. 1 in every 3. I'm sorry, I misquoted that. 1 in every 3 American women. It is also important to consider that abortion is not always a matter of personal choice, but of medical necessity, as in the case of 41-year-old DJ Feldman, an American federal lawyer, who at 11 weeks pregnant learned that her baby would be born with a fetal defect called anencephaly that leaves babies with almost no brain and is always fatal. Normal delivery would have put Feldman in position of experiencing a dysfunctional labor and postpartum hemorrhage, but her abortion saved her life. Do you really wish to punish American women just like me for having the right to make choices for their own bodies and lives? Do you really wish to send us to jail for having abortions? Do you really wish to send the doctors who perform abortions to jail? Why not instead treat abortion as the service it was intended to be, a legal and safe last resort option for women and not a primary means of birth control? Educate everyone, men and women, boys and girls, on the correct contraception methods and provide easy access to contraception to reduce the need for abortion. In addition to this, there should be federally funded job training programs, health care, child care services, and other services to aid women in caring for their existing children and to aid women who desire not to have an abortion, care for their unborn child. In closing, we believe that any woman who needs an abortion should be able to have one safely and with dignity. Thank you.
Our second speaker from Students for Life, Joe Lippa.
Good evening. At its most fundamental level, the debate surrounding Roe v. Wade comes down to one question and one question only. That question is this: what is the unborn? Is the unborn a human being? If so, is the unborn a human person with an intrinsic right to life? The first question, is the unborn a human being, is a scientific question. So to answer it, let us turn to science. I respectfully challenge my pro-choice colleagues to find any modern scientific textbook that does not reiterate the following from The Developing Human by Keith L. Moore. Quote, human development begins at fertilization, the process during which male gamete or sperm unites with a female gamete or ovum to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized, totipotent cell marked the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. End quote. Contrast this with the majority opinion in Roe v. Wade, penned 3 decades before. Quote, the judiciary, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to resolve the difficult question of when life begins, since those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus. End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, why are we letting a 1973 view of biology overshadow what we scientifically know to be true today? We are in the 21st century, and it's time the law reflect that. Now, science may be able to answer the question of when life begins, but it cannot tell us how to treat this life. This is a philosophical question, so accordingly we will turn to philosophy to answer it. Suppose a born person is in front of me, say a newborn infant girl. Is it okay to kill her? Some of you are probably thinking, that's a ridiculous question. Of course not. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to argue that there are only 4 differences between a newborn and a fetus in the womb. And I believe that none of these differences justify being able to kill the latter, but not the former. The newborn and the fetus differ in, number 1, size, number 2, level of development, number 3, environment, and number 4, degree of dependency. With regard to size, I believe this is irrelevant. Since when do big people have more rights than smaller people? Men tend to be bigger than women. Does this mean that we should give women less rights? Of course not. With regard to level of development, if this were relevant, the amount of rights we would have would be a bell curve. People tend to reach their peak physical maturity in the late 20s, and their peak intellectual maturity in the late 30s. Does this mean that middle-aged people are worth more than toddlers or the elderly? Of course not. Human development does not stop at birth. Environment. Do we become more or less of a person by changing locations? If you walk from outside into a building, do you stop becoming you? Of course not. Then how can a mere 8 inches down the birth canal change a non-person that we can kill into a member of the human family that we cannot? Degree of dependency. Yes, the fetus depends on the mother to survive, but is this any different from the newborn that also depends on the mother to survive? Or what about those who have pacemakers or on oxygen machines? Do they lose their rights just because they depend on other people or things? Of course not. As you can see, none of these differences justify being able to kill an unborn human being regardless of how painful the situation, difficult the circumstances, or hopeless the future looks for the child. Why? For the exact same reason we would never kill a newborn who is born into the same conditions. Once again, it all comes down to this question: what is the unborn? Science tells us that yes, the unborn is a life. Basic philosophical reasoning tells us that yes, the unborn is a person. Therefore, the most basic of human decency tells us that no, the unborn may not be killed because she is unexpected or inconvenient. Ladies and gentlemen, why doesn't our current law do the same? Thank you.
And now our second speaker from Secular Student Alliance, Sahana Prasad.
As the other group previously stated, the legality of abortion essentially boils down to one major point of contention: whether or not the process of abortion actively ends a human life. We can definitively say that abortion does not unlawfully terminate a life because life does not begin at conception, and therefore Roe v. Wade is not inherently unlawful or unconstitutional. To understand this, we must consider the fact that the process of life is continuous. There is no point during the process of conception at which life arises out of no life. The gametic precursors to the fetus were alive, and the cells that gave rise to those gametes were alive before they went through meiosis, etc. We must therefore abandon the notion that life begins as the product of a fertilization event. We cannot ascribe arbitrary value to what is essentially only a cluster of cells. We should further discuss the idea of potentiality. It is often claimed that conception should be the marker for a human life because it marks the formation of something that can grow into a thinking, feeling, reasoning human being. However, we cannot equate the potential to do or be something with actually doing or being it. In the words of Judith Jarvis Thompson, a highly respected MIT professor whose essay on abortion is the most widely reprinted essay in all of modern philosophy, a newly fertilized ovum, a newly implanted clump of cells, is no more a person than an acorn is an oak tree. To see this, Consider extrapolating the potential argument in the other direction. All human beings will die. And seeing as a zygote will form a human being who will later form a corpse, it follows that we should treat both people and zygotes as if they were corpses. Under this reasoning, every person should be treated as a pre-dead corpse. Not to mention, skin cells can replace sperm in forming human beings due to the totipotent nature of human somatic cells. So it follows that each skin cell destroyed is akin to destroying a human being. Unless, of course, having the potential to do or be something isn't actually equal to doing or being it. Conception is a completely arbitrary point to which to ascribe the inception of life. But for the sake of brevity, we will henceforth make this assumption. However, even if we concede that life begins at conception, a woman's right to control what happens over her own body supersedes the right of the fetus. The pro-life group has undoubtedly contended that a person's right to life, assuming, of course, that we qualify a fetus as a human life, is stronger and more stringent than the mother's right to decide what happens to her own body, and so outweighs it. However, this is not the case. The woman's consent during a pregnancy is continuous and can be revoked at any time. The idea of consent is an important one. Some people who identify as pro-life will concede that abortion can be considered in cases of rape because the mother did not consent to the conception. When we consider the idea of consent during sexual encounters, even if a woman initially consents to having sexual intercourse, it is legally permissible for her to revoke that consent at any time. In the same vein, a woman's consent to pregnancy does not end with the conception. A woman is actively consenting to house the fetus at every point during her pregnancy, and she thus has the right to revoke that consent at any time. As outlined by both Judith Jarvis Thompson and Roderick T. Long, a fetus's right to life does not include the right to invade another person's body. Therefore, by terminating a pregnancy, a woman is not violating a fetus's right to life, but rather depriving the fetus of the use of her body to which the fetus has no right in the first place. Thank you.
I invite our third speaker from the Student for Life Association, Elise Eichmann, to stand. Thank you.
Good evening. In 1973, Roe v. Wade opened the doors to a new set of laws that legalize abortion. But why do laws exist in the first place? Isn't one of the most basic purposes of law to protect people's lives? I will highlight for you 3 reasons why Roe v. Wade should be overturned. First, like the 1857 Dred Scott decision, Roe v. Wade uses arbitrary criteria to deprive an entire group of people from legal protection. Secondly, Roe v. Wade imposes a distorted notion of rights, the right to kill. And third, if society has doubts over the personhood of the fetus, the law should err on the side of caution by protecting human life, not authorizing its destruction. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott case that African Americans could not be considered persons. This grievous value judgment, based on the arbitrary criterion of skin color, declared that some people were not valuable enough to have equal protection under the law. The Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade parallels the Dred Scott case because it too declares that an entire group of people, namely the preborn, are not worthy of equal protection under the law because of the arbitrary criterion of their location still in their mother's wombs. Roe thus leads to gross inconsistencies, wherein a fetus born early is given medical care, while another fetus of the same age is legally aborted. It is not the fact that we are born that makes us valuable, it's the fact that we are human. Roe does not reflect this. Next, Roe v. Wade claims that a woman's right to privacy includes the right to kill her fetus. However, when one person's actions infringe on someone else's basic liberty, the law should and must intervene. Our rights end where someone else's begin. No one, whether in public or in private, has the unlimited right to do whatever they want with their body. If I swing my arms in the air, I'm doing what I want with my body. But if my swinging arms pose a threat to someone else's rights, my rights are curbed because they infringe on the rights of that other person. In the same way, the law should not allow a right to privacy to override the most basic right of all, the right to life. Finally, if society has doubts over whether a fetus is a person, and the simple fact that we're here tonight shows that there is a lack of consensus, the law should err on the side of caution. Imagine that you're sitting in the driver's seat of a bulldozer, and it's your job to demolish a building. Someone runs over it and says, "Wait, I think there might be people in the building." Do you go ahead and simply bulldoze the building, or do you first make absolutely certain that the building is empty? You must err on the side of caution in a situation of life and death, such as abortion. Roe versus Wade does not. If we admit that there is even the possibility that abortion kills a person, the law must err on the side of caution and reject abortion. The burden of proof of the unborn's personhood or non-personhood, should lie with those who support abortion, not with those who oppose it. It's been said that you can evaluate a society by the way it treats the most vulnerable. Who is more vulnerable than the preborn child? The preborn are human organisms, and that fact makes them valuable and deserving of legal protection. Roe versus Wade excludes them from that protection based on their location in the womb. Because Roe deprives an entire group of individuals from legal protection under the law, claims a distorted right to kill, and does not err on the side of caution in the presence of doubt, Roe versus Wade should be overturned.
I now invite our third speaker from Secular Student Alliance, Dakota Hatfield.
Okay, now that we've presented the argument for our own position, that of giving women the freedom over their own bodies, I invite you, the audience, to examine the position of our antagonists. They have spent their last 12 minutes equating abortion with murder. I invite you to consider the thought experiment. Imagine, if you can, the impact that such an idea would have on our legal system, our culture, and on our domestic and foreign policy. Well, if abortion is murder, then at the very least, the precedent set by Roe v. Wade must be overturned. Abortion must be made illegal. I want to hear from our opponents what they believe the punishment should be for any woman who performs or has performed on her an abortion. Where is the authoritative statement of legal action outlining the precise punishment for all parties involved? I missed it. If we follow their ridiculous ethical logic, it seems obvious that the woman and or the doctor should be charged with murder in the first degree. Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that her sentence would be worse than that of a rapist. Not insignificant. Now, with 1 in 3 American women having abortions before the age of 45, overturning Roe v. Wade would mean that essentially 1/3 of our female population would be in prison before the age of 45. Now, you might ask, how can I prove this? How can I say that women would continue to have abortions even if we're illegal? Well, consider the Philippines, where pregnant women are doing just that, despite the severe anti-abortion laws that can sentence her to prison for the non-crime of wanting control over her own body. Something like 12% of all maternal deaths in the Philippines are the result of abortions. 100,000 women wind up in hospital, and many more die every year because of this asinine policy. Now, map that onto the United States. I don't think I need to spell out how hideous the consequences would be. And if all of this, all of these staggering figures, and all this suffering, and all this stupidity seems completely absurd, and completely nihilistic, and completely immoral, well, it's because it is. But that is what the other side must offer. Otherwise, if they insist, as they have, on calling abortion murder, and they don't think that women and doctors who perform them should be put in jail, I don't see how they can be called anything other than moral hypocrites and moral cowards. As Carmen said, stand up for the victims of evil, protect people's lives, and human decency. Why don't they have the courage of their convictions and actually say what they believe the law should be? It's because they understand exactly how insane the consequences would be. I mean, did you hear a single word, a sentence, even a suggestion about the law? Not a bit of it. Rather revealing, don't you think? Our side is clear. We stand for a woman's right to choose because we stand for the only known cure for poverty, the empowerment of women. We stand for removing the shackles of poverty, ignorance, and shame from women all around the world. How is their side helping the plight of women? And it's because they're not pro-life. No, they're anti-choice. We are pro-choice because we support the lives of women in this country and any other. Our opponents don't seem to care about the horrific societal consequences that making abortion illegal would have on the people who already populate it. No, all they care about is the fetus. Not about the thousands of women who die or have to be hospitalized. Not about the tremendous forced exodus of women from the workplace. Not about the poverty that this would induce in already destitute families. No, none of that. Their position would destroy life. It eviscerates the possibility of trying to improve the quality of life in our tenuous civilization, all because of this fatuous obsession with forcing women to be slaves to their own reproductive cycle. And I cannot believe I'm hearing it said on a university campus in this year of grace that we who support a woman's right to choose are somehow slave owners, equivalent to the Dred Scott decision or genocists. They dare invoke Dred Scott? I mean, you saw the Genocide Awareness Project, the organization that set up those ridiculous, appalling horror show displays a few weeks ago. I don't like being addressed in that tone of voice, and I don't think any of you in the audience like to be addressed in that way either. Now this is masochism, ladies and gentlemen, but it's being offered to you by sadists. Thank you.
I now invite the fourth speaker from Students for Life, Anna Poe, to the podium.
Good evening. I would like to address for a moment the idea of eviction. You may compare the fetus to an unwanted tenant who has taken up residence in a woman's body, just as philosopher Judith Jarvis Thompson does in her paper, A Defense of Abortion. She says, quote, "You wake up one morning and find yourself back-to-back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He's been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to health." Unquote. Thompson basically positioned you as someone who must be attached to this violinist for 9 months to provide the violinist with life. You can detach yourself from the violinist, but then he will die. In other words, it would be heroic of you to co-opt your own body so as to save the violinist, but it is not ethically required. I posit, however, that we may make a bold distinction. That between a mother who has naturally brought her child into being and the hypothetical you of Thompson's argument, who has no relation of any sort with the violinist. More importantly, however, I would like to point out that our country has laws governing neglect by parents after the birth of a child, and rightfully so. As my colleague Joe has explained, there is no significant difference between a child before birth and one after that justifies killing him at that earlier stage. One cannot abandon a born child, and so why can a mother eject, so to speak, an unborn one? Quite often, the violinist argument is used to defend personal liberty. The fetus is an unwanted tenant, some may argue, and the mother has a right to evict it just as a landlord might throw out an inhabitant who didn't pay his rent, or a homeowner might fight off a burglar who broke through a window. To that, I reiterate that a mother and father do have an obligation to their baby more than the landlord does to the tenant, certainly more than the homeowner does to the burglar, and yes, more than you have to the violinist. After all, it is not through you that the violinist came into being. Additionally, here, the eviction is far more than a tough break for a lazy tenant. Eviction of the unborn at the mother's behest kills a distinct human child. I would like to add that an adult violinist soliciting a kidney donation does so aware of the risks to the other person. The fetus is defenseless and deserves to be protected, and that makes it an entirely different ballgame. So let us return to Roe versus Wade. If it is an issue of personal liberty rather than the life of the fetus, we find ourselves having a slightly different conversation. However, as Elisa said, your rights end where someone else's rights begin. The fetus is not going to kill the mother has no right to kill it. We're not talking about right now about the circumstances, sometimes tragic, that would cause a woman to seek an abortion. By meeting the violinist argument on its own terms, I am speaking purely of personal rights. We find in the fetus and its mother each a right to life. Their rights to life can coexist and do so in pregnancies that are carried to term. However, when the mother takes action to end the fetus's life, she is infringing on the rights of another human. I would like to also address for the moment the issue of back alley abortions. Dr. Bernard Nathanson, who was an abortion doctor for many years and then became a pro-life advocate, said, quote, "Repeating the big lie often enough convinces the public. The figure we constantly fed to the media was 10,000, unquote, when in actuality 200 to 250 women died of illegal abortions on average per year in the years before Roe v. Wade." Dr. Mary Calderon, Planned Parenthood's former medical director, said in 1960 that in 1957 there were only 260 deaths in the whole country attributed to abortions of any kind. Now, keep in mind that even one death because of this is tragic. I do not wish to position us as the pro-life advocates who care purely about the fetus and not about the woman, because that is not who we are. However, if the unborn are human, and I believe we can prove that they are, then they are a class deserving of protection. The argument about the dangers of illegal abortion assumes that the unborn are not human or that they are not deserving of protection. But we don't try to make unsavory or illegal activities more comfortable in other circumstances. To say that making abortion illegal would automatically drive women to back alley abortions is a very big jump to make, and not one that was true in the years in America before Roe versus Wade. Thank you.
Secular Student Alliance, Michael Jacobson to the podium, and he's already there.
Whether abortion is legal or illegal, it continues to surround all of us. In an attempt to rid the troubles that the root causes of the abortion cycle has given us, our country has divided itself in two: pro-choice and pro-life movements. This gets really controversial because each side of the argument is fighting for human rights. Unfortunately, when we are divided, we cannot rid of the root causes of this issue, compared to if we did work together in unity. What seems to be going on instead is one movement, pro-life or pro-choice, is trying to defeat the other movement, half of the country, with money, law, resources, people, and energy. But what if, for once, everyone in the United States could be against the root causes of the cycle of abortion? For once, the whole country would be working together, putting all their resources, enthusiasm, to ridding the roots of this whole issue. For once, the other half of the country would not be an enemy, but a partner. For once, we would be able to reach across the aisle and agree together based on the little but very significant common ground. Why would we do that? Because for once, as a united country, we would show what the unborn and women are, that they are worth reaching across an aisle, and they are truly worth it. The common ground that neither side of this abortion debate actually wants a high abortion rate is probably one of the most significant things to have in common with each other. Let's get to the point and look at what allows this whole issue to exist in the first place. There are two root causes that allow this issue to continue to exist that divide us and create this complex, emotional, and controversial issue of abortion. The first, unplanned pregnancies. This is the situation that allows for the option of an abortion scenario to exist. If this did not exist, then you would be looking at very few situations or circumstances where abortions would occur. The best way to address this is to reach everyone. We need to promote abstinence, natural family planning, barrier and hormonal contraceptives for those who are having sex or will. The education and knowledge for these life-saving tools need to be in front of us always. The second route, having real alternatives to abortion. People who may not want to have an abortion, but due to economic circumstances, should have real alternatives that are of good quality. Good quality adoption system, prenatal care, help with rent, school. For example, Catholic pro-life women are getting abortions for economic reasons. They do not want to. They wish they didn't have to. If we could provide real ways to support women for whatever choice they make financially, for schooling, time, and so on. Unplanned pregnancies and not having real alternatives to abortion, these two things allow this issue to continue. If they disappear, this issue will disappear in most cases. Interesting thing, this doesn't only make sense logically, but has shown to work. Ever question what country does have the lowest abortion rate in the world? The answer is the Netherlands. Belgium and Germany are close. Abortion is legal there, but they each have decided to combat high unplanned pregnancy rates, STD rates, and abortion rates, while increasing overall wellness for women in those countries. If you are worried about the unborn, do what the country who has the lowest abortion rate is doing. Back to us. What if we do not work together and do not address the root causes? Unplanned pregnancies and having real alternatives. It has been 38 years since Roe v. Wade. What is going to happen in the next 38 years? Are we going to keep arguing and refusing to work together for another 38 years? Or are we going to finally be the ones to start bringing this cycle to an end by fighting the actual root causes? Life for women and the unborn would be so much better if this happened. There are so many issues that exist today. War, starvation, drought, sex trafficking, sex and gender discrimination, disease, failing economies, reproductive health, and abortion issues. Let's try to solve one of these big issues soon. Get rid of the roots. We know how to. Improve the world for women and the unborn. Then we can keep stretching these world issues off one by one. We do not have to be divided. We can address these issues together. Let's cease fire and make some things happen unitedly. Let's fight the real root causes. We have shown the statistics, who this is affecting. Yeah.